You towed what? The federal agent's voice snapped like a whip through the eerie silence of our street, his boots crunching gravel as he gaped at the empty, scorched patch where my driveway once held a treasure. My neighbor, Karen Hley, the HOA president, and a walking storm cloud of entitlement, stood off to the side, smirking, one hand recording on her phone, while the other clutched a Diet Cola like a trophy. It was just a junk plane, she huffed, as if she hadn't just sparked a federal crime scene meltdown. The agent didn't flinch, he just locked eyes on her, then without a turn, radioed in. "Notify the NTSB director. We've got a civilian interference case and the evidence. It's gone." Karen blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" Oh, she was about to discover just how deadly serious federal agents get when you tow an aircraft mid-crash investigation. It all kicked off 2 weeks earlier when I hauled the battered wreck of my experimental light aircraft, callsign XQ9, home on a flatbed trailer after a fuel system glitch forced a crash landing in a remote desert stretch. The National Transportation Safety Board swooped in fast, ordering me to secure the wreckage at my place, document it, and wait for their inspection. As a certified aviation engineer with a license to build and fly experimental craft, I was on top of it, but to the HOA and especially Karen, it was just trash. Shiny, federally sealed trash, she griped, ruining the view from her overpriced rose garden. I live on a modest acre lot outside Phoenix, the kind of semi-rural haven where folks keep horses, tinker in hobby garages, and rig homemade wind turbines. The plane rested on my side driveway, half covered with a tarp, NTSB seals plastered across the fuselage panels, and a bold "Do Not Tamper Federal Investigation" tag dangling from the throttle. I even placed orange cones around it just to be safe, but apparently safety wasn't HOI approved. Karen first showed up the evening after I brought the plane home. She strutted across my lawn like she owned the oxygen and demanded I remove the heap of sky junk by morning. I tried to be polite. I explained the situation. I showed her the federal documents. She scoffed, said anyone could print that online, and called it a failed cosplay project. Then she actually accused me of prepping for a backyard terror attack. I should have known then. It wouldn't end there. The next day, I got the first violation notice taped to my mailbox. Unauthorized structure. Not a word about planes or permits. Just a threat to fine me. $500 per day. I scanned it and emailed it straight to the NTSB contact assigned. To my case, he responded with a short but stern reply. Absolutely do not move the aircraft. We are dispatching a field investigator to inspect it in person. He also mentioned that any tampering or unauthorized relocation could compromise the crash. Analysis: I printed that email and handed a copy to Karen the next time she came stomping up my port. She tore it in half and said, "Fake try harder." 3 days passed. Karen escalated. She started leaving. Rude notes in my mailbox, signed the Neighborhood Aesthetics Committee. Mind you, there is no such committee. She made it up. Then she began walking her dog past my house 6 times a day just to glare at the wreck. A couple of other residents quietly told me she'd been rallying to have me fined, even expelled from the community altogether. One guy, Greg, from across the cul-de-sac, shrugged and said, "I told her it was none of our business," she said, and I quote, "We'll see what the tow truck thinks." That part chilled me. I immediately contacted the NTSB agent again. He thanked me and assured me the inspection would happen within 72 hours. He said a federal field vehicle had already been dispatched. I tightened the tarp, locked down the straps, and installed a camera above my driveway, just in case. The inspection was scheduled for Saturday morning. That Friday night, I went to bed, with a strange feeling crawling up my spine core. It gut instinct, or maybe I just lived near Karen long enough to recognize her patterns. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't prepare for, was waking up to the sound of chains, metal grinding and backup alarms echoing through the neighborhood. At 7:15, I ran out the front door, barefoot coffee spilling down my shirt, and saw a tow truck already half hoisting the fuselage into the air. Karen stood by, smiling like she'd just won a reality TV show. She even waved, "Good morning. Your trash problem is being handled." I shouted at the driver to stop. He said, "Sorry, sir, this was ordered by the HOA. You'll have to take it up with him." I pointed at the federal seals. The cones, the clearly labeled "Do Not Move" tag. His eyes flicked up, but he kept working. That's when I noticed Karen was live streaming the entire thing. "We're cleaning up the streets," she said into her phone. "No more rust buckets on HOA turf." By the time I grabbed my phone to call the NTSB, the truck was already halfway down the street. I gave them the plate, the company name, the direction. The line went quiet. Then the agent asked me the question I'll never forget: did anyone remove the flight recorder unit? I froze the flight recorder. The black box was still embedded in the fuselage Karen had just towed away, a federal aircraft that contained live crash data and hadn't been legally cleared for movement. The response from the NTSB was instant and nuclear. Within 30 minutes, unmarked cars were swarming my block. 2 agents were at my door. One ran toward Karen's property the moment they saw the video she'd posted. She greeted them like they were late to brunch. That brings us back to the moment it all truly fell apart. The agent shouting at her, Karen standing there speechless for the first time in her life. She had thought this was just another HOA power move. She had no idea she just inserted herself into an active federal case. Later that afternoon, as the investigators combed the area and took statements from anyone with an earshot, I overheard an agent say, "If that wreckage crosses state lines, we've got a jurisdictional mess. And if the flight data is corrupted, someone's going to jail." Karen, watching from her porch, muttered, "They're bluffing." But her hand was shaking. What Karen didn't know, and what she was about to learn the hard way, was that interfering with crash evidence isn't just a minor issue, it's a felony. And while she thought she'd scored a win for neighborhood beauty, she'd just detonated a legal firestorm she couldn't even begin to comprehend. And I was just getting started by mid-May morning. The entire block looked like a movie set, except this one starred confused retirees, barking dogs, 2 federal SUVs, and a very flustered HOA president who kept muttering about her rights while pacing in bedroom slippers. The NTSB agents weren't exactly the kind of folks you wanted mad at you. They didn't wear fancy jackets or guns on their belts like FBI agents. No, their strength came from federal authority and an unshakable seriousness that made every word they said feel like it had been carved in stone. One of them, a grizzled woman named Agent Blevins, turned to me as Karen watched from behind her blinds and said with a grim face, "That woman just interfered with a federally protected crash investigation. We don't take that lightly." By then the tow truck had been traced. It belonged to a small-time outfit called Tough Hauls, a company that apparently didn't ask too many questions as long as the check cleared. The driver, a nervous guy named Donnie, answered his phone on the 3rd ring, and I only caught parts of the conversation from where I was standing. But from Agent Blevins' expression, I could tell things were going south fast. "What do you mean you didn't check the tags?" she barked. "You removed a crash scene." "That's not just a civil infraction, that's evidence tampering." She slammed her phone shut and looked at me. He says, "The plane was taken to a scrapyard. We don't know where the black box is. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the entire block." The black box, the only onboard data recording equipment in the aircraft, was crucial. It recorded engine output, mechanical readings, and control responses leading up to the crash. Without it, the NTSB wouldn't just lose evidence, they could lose their chance to understand whether a flaw in the design could endanger future aircraft. I had built that plane with a custom power plant. If something was wrong with that system, other engineers needed to know lives could be at risk. That's why the feds had been so insistent on preserving the wreckage exactly as it was. While the agents scrambled to locate the fuselage, Karen was in full meltdown mode. She stormed down her porch stairs with a manila folder of HOA bylaws in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. She marched straight up to the NTSB vehicle and began tapping on the window with the back of her acrylic nails. "Excuse me," she shouted, "I demand to know what jurisdiction you think you have to harass a neighborhood board member." Agent Blevins calmly stepped out, folded her arms, and said, "Ma'am, do you understand that removing a federally tagged aircraft is a felony?" Karen rolled her eyes. "It's not even a real plane. It doesn't even have wings. It's just a pile of scrap metal and duct tape." I could feel my stomach churn. She had no idea what she'd done. Blevins tried to be patient. "Ma'am, it was an active investigation scene. We issued a notice, we placed seals. There was a federal tag on the cockpit." Karen scoffed. "Well, I thought that was fake. You people print stickers on the internet all the time." The agents exchanged looks like they were debating whether they should be taking notes or calling for backup. Then Blevins leaned in and said, "That sticker is from the National Transportation Safety Board. Tampering with it is the same as removing a police crime scene tape, and you recorded yourself doing it. Congratulations." Karen's eyes finally flickered with the first trace of real concern. Meanwhile, I was quietly panicking in my own way. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from neighbors asking what was happening. A few offered support, but most were just nosy. One text read, "Is it true you brought a spy drone into the community?" Another simply said, "Can I sue the HOA if my kids saw the wreck?" Greg from across the street walked over with a bag of chips in hand and whispered, "You know she's in real trouble, right?" I nodded but didn't reply. There was no victory in this, just stress and a mess nobody wanted to clean up. The agents got a break when one of the scrapyard owners returned their call. Apparently a damaged aircraft had arrived earlier that morning. No paperwork, no bill of sale, just dropped off and left at the far end of the lot. The driver said the woman who ordered the tow told him, "Just leave it there. It's garbage from a neighborhood." They sent local law enforcement to lock the yard down and preserve the scene. The fuselage was still intact, but the cockpit had been pried open, the black box gone. The reaction from the agents was immediate and fierce. They called in a specialist team to comb the scrapyard. They notified internal forensic analysts, they flagged the GPS history of the tow truck, and they made it abundantly clear to Karen that she was now officially the subject of a federal obstruction case. Karen tried to play dumb. She claimed she thought the tow was legal, that she didn't notice the stickers, that she thought it was a community safety issue, but her live stream, still up on her social media, showed her clearly stepping over the warning tape and mocking the inspection process. I watched in disbelief as she pivoted, turning to me like I was the villain. "You've made this into a witch hunt," she snapped. "If you hadn't brought that wreck into our neighborhood, none of this would have happened. I couldn't help myself. If you hadn't towed it without permission, we'd still have the flight recorder," I replied calmly. She narrowed her eyes. I was protecting the neighborhood, Blevins interrupted. You protected it right into a felony charge as the sun set. That day, our peaceful block was still crawling with agents and investigators. Karen's once spotless HOA reputation had been shattered into dust. Her fellow board members had started whispering about removing her. One of them even stopped by my driveway and quietly apologized for voting with her. I didn't know she was going to go this far, he said. We thought it was just about property values, but this had never been about property values. This was about control. Karen couldn't handle anything. She didn't understand a broken plane. To her, that was chaos disorder. It didn't fit the cookie-cutter world she tried to maintain, and in trying to wipe it away, she'd kicked over a hornet's nest of federal power and criminal consequences. The real irony was that the data she might have destroyed wasn't just about some personal project of mine. It was about aircraft safety on a national level. That black box could have helped prevent future failures, saved lives, maybe even inspired new safety measures. And Karen, in her quest to beautify the cul-de-sac, might have erased it all with a single phone call to a discount tow company. But it wasn't over yet. The NTSB wasn't giving up, and neither was I. That wreckage would be found. The flight data might still be retrievable, and Karen, she had no idea just how much higher this was going to escalate, because once the Department of Transportation caught wind of what she'd done, and the Department of Justice reviewed the footage, she'd be facing more than angry neighbors. She'd be facing consequences that couldn't be written off with HOA fines and smarmy Facebook posts. She had messed with the wrong junk, and soon she'd find out just how valuable that junk really was. The following days unfolded like a bizarre legal drama being written in real time, and Karen, the self-declared guardian of suburban purity, was now center stage for all the wrong reasons. Word of her federal charges had spread fast, not just in the neighborhood, but across the wider city. It didn't take long for local news stations to catch wind of the story. One headline read, "HOA President destroys aircraft evidence, faces federal charges accompanied by a freeze frame of her HOA clubhouse meltdown with the karaoke mic." Still in her hand, Karen tried to paint herself as a victim of federal overreach, but every attempt only made things worse. Her HOA supporters, once a devoted clique, began peeling away like rust on a neglected mailbox. Even her vice president, a soft-spoken man named Arlo, who once voted to ban porch flags over 6 in wide-handed in his resignation and claimed he never thought this would involve the Department of Justice. Meanwhile, the black box that had been miraculously recovered from that storage unit was undergoing urgent analysis in a DC lab. The NTSB emailed me updates, intermittently, always brief, always measured, but one message stood out: preliminary data intact, further investigation underway. You may have helped prevent a major defect from reaching certification. Those few words hit me like a freight train. All that stress, all that conflict, it wasn't just about my plane anymore. It was about the wider aviation community. I had spent years tinkering with prototypes, testing new materials, pushing boundaries. If one faulty part, one error in the control algorithm had gone undetected, other builders might have used the same systems. The flight recorder data could expose what we'd missed. Back in the neighborhood, Karen wasn't taking any of it quietly. Her response to the growing public embarrassment was to go full conspiracy theorists. She hosted backyard briefings for the remaining 3 HOA loyalists, passing around printed packets filled with Google screenshots and handwritten annotations claiming the NTSB was colluding with aircraft manufacturers to target patriots. She even accused me of faking the crash to get media attention and began referring to the wreckage as a false flag operation. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. Her behavior was spiraling and fast. It didn't help that her attorney, some cousin from Flagstaff with a revoked bar license and a beat-up Jeep, was just as off the rails. He filed a motion to dismiss all charges on the grounds that planes aren't real property if they can't fly. The judge denied it so hard. The court clerk snorted audibly while stamping the paperwork. Karen tried to act as her own legal expert during HOA meetings, printing copies of aviation law she barely understood and citing obscure YouTube videos as sources. Every word out of her mouth made things worse. The final straw for many came when she called a surprise emergency HOA meeting at 1000 p.m. and used the entire hour to play a PowerPoint slideshow titled "How Ray is Destroying Our Neighborhood with Fake Planes and FBI Friends." It was so surreal I almost forgot how serious the consequences really were. The DOJ had officially indicted her for obstruction of an investigation, tampering with federal property, and conspiracy to conceal evidence. If convicted, she could face prison time, massive fines, and a permanent record that no HOA charm offensive could erase. Still, she doubled down. Still, she denied everything. But her house no longer held the same smug glow it once did. The curtains remained shut, the porch lights off. Her infamous rose garden, once obsessively trimmed, had grown into a tangled mess of weeds and dry leaves. Even her dog looked depressed. Around this time, I received a letter, not from the NTSB this time, but from a small aircraft design firm out of Colorado. They'd seen the story, recognized the aircraft model, and informed me that they were halting production on a line of kits based on the exact configuration I had flown. They were waiting on the black box data to see if their manufacturing protocols needed immediate revision. "We saw a spike in your throttle readings before failure," the engineer wrote. "If that proves to be a recurring pattern, we'll issue a bulletin to builders nationwide." I sat back and exhaled. This whole nightmare had started with a wreck and a warning. Now it might just save lives. But as one fire cooled, another flared up. Karen had been subpoenaed to appear at a federal pre-trial hearing, and instead of showing up with remorse or dignity, she brought chaos. She wore a T-shirt that read "Feds, Fear, Freedom" under a bright pink blazer, and interrupted the judge 3 times to ask if she could present a slideshow. She insisted the black box had been planted, accused the agents of targeting her for beautifying the neighborhood, and then tried to introduce her own evidence. A screenshot of my Facebook page with the caption, "Ray equals possible deep state operative." The judge stared at her in silence for a long time before finally saying, "Miss Karen, I advise you to retain competent counsel." Immediately, her stunt made the evening news again, and this time the neighborhood fully turned on her. Her mailbox was flooded with complaints. Several homeowners called an emergency HOA board meeting to propose a vote of no confidence. A petition to remove her from office racked up signatures so fast that by the end of the day it had more names than the last. Neighborhood yard sale sign-up list. And I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile because I didn't need to. She was doing all the work for me. Then came the twist nobody expected. One evening, just before sunset, I got a knock at my door. It was Agent Blevins holding a thin metal case in an envelope. "We've recovered full flight data from the black box," she said calmly, "and we've found something." My heart thudded. She opened the case and handed me a printed readout. There it was, engine sensor readings control input logs a sudden spike in electrical load just seconds before failure. It pointed to a critical flaw in the redundant wiring harness one that only manifested under specific flight conditions, a flaw that had gone unnoticed by multiple builders because it was buried in the failover logic. Without the crash, without the recorder, without that exact flight profile, no one would have known. She explained that the NTSB was filing an official safety bulletin. All owners of similar models would be contacted and updates would be made mandatory before further flights. Your data might have just prevented a disaster, she said. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, speechless. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. That night, I looked across the street at Karen's dark house. No porch lights, no music playing, no HOA flyers stuffed into neighbors' mailboxes. Just silence. The woman who once ruled the block with threats of fines and finger-wagging was now a cautionary tale in every local HOA group chat, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Her trial loomed. Her position as HOA president was hanging by a thread, and the very foundation of her power, her ability to intimidate, was gone. What remained was the aftermath, and that was something she could never tow away. The neighborhood felt different now, like the spell Karen had cast for years had finally broken. There was laughter echoing from front yards again. Kids riding their bikes without fear of being shouted at for curb chalk violations, and porch lights that had been dark for months flickered on again like little signals of relief. But under that quiet revival was a brewing storm, one Karen had no clue how to control anymore. Her world, once built on threats and clipboard tyranny, was slipping through her hands like sand, and she responded to that the only way she knew how, by doubling down. Despite facing serious federal charges, Karen decided the real enemy wasn't the government or me or even common sense. It was her own HOA board. The same people who had supported her for years were now scrambling to save their own skins. Several board members had quietly distanced themselves, claiming they had no knowledge of the illegal tow. Even though screenshots from their group chat suggested otherwise, Karen wasn't about to take the fall alone, and, like a captain, handcuffing herself. To a sinking ship, she declared that every one of them was going down with her unless they rallied behind her again. Her threats weren't subtle. She emailed everyone a neighborhood loyalty oath and warned that anyone who betrayed her would be named publicly during her trial as a co-conspirator in HOA negligence. The problem was, nobody was listening anymore. One by one, the board members resigned. Arla left a box of HOA records on Karen's doorstep with a sticky note that read, "I'm done." Sheila, the treasurer, sent an email blast saying she had never agreed with Karen's tactics, but was too scared to speak up. Karen responded by changing the HOA's community website password and locking everyone out. She then declared herself interim, emergency president, and began issuing bizarre neighborhood mandates, including a noise curfew that prohibited leaf blowers before 10 p.m. and no reflective garden gnomes. Nobody followed them. Instead, someone printed fake HOA flyers mocking her new rules. And within days, reflective gnome rebellion signs started appearing in front lawns like protest flags. Karen's reign had become satire, and it was glorious. Around that time, the NTSB released their official report confirming everything Agent Blevins had told me. The crash had been caused by a critical flaw in the electrical redundancy system, a flaw that could have affected dozens of experimental kits across the country. The report credited data recovered from a tampered unit recovered in Arizona as essential to identifying the fault. The language was dry, formal, and filled with technical jargon, but the message was Unmistakable. My crash, my plane. The very aircraft Karen had called a trash sculpture had contributed directly to national aviation safety. The moment the report dropped, my inbox exploded. Engineers, hobbyists, even 2 military contractors reached out to thank me. One guy from Minnesota sent a gift basket and a note that read, "Your wreck saved my workshop." We were days away from wiring the same circuit. I didn't post about it. I didn't boast, I let the facts speak for themselves, but the neighborhood certainly noticed. Greg came over with a 6-pack and just said, "You win." Even the grumpy older couple, 2 houses down, left a sticky note on my door that said, "Sorry for doubting you." Meanwhile, Karen was unraveling. She released a video on her social page titled "The Real Story," how I was set up by aerospace tyrants, where she claimed I worked for an unnamed government agency and the entire plane wreck was staged to ruin her HOA career. She tried to present screenshots of what she called evidence, but most of it looked like cropped photos of my LinkedIn profile next to grainy images of airport runways. The video got 4 views before the platform flagged it for misinformation. The trial date was set, and as it approached, Karen's behavior only grew more erratic. She accused the new acting HOA president, a sweet retired firefighter named Dana, of organizing a deep state coup. She started stapling manifestos to community bulletin boards and knocking on doors at odd hours to pass out pamphlets warning of a neighborhood under siege. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so sad. At one point, she even called the local news to set up an interview, but when the reporter arrived and asked basic questions about her actions, Karen stormed off mid-filming and claimed she was being censored. Then came the final neighborhood meeting before the trial. It was supposed to be a simple budget vote, but word spread fast that Karen was planning to show up. The community center was packed. Standing room only people brought snacks like it was movie night. And, sure enough, Karen marched in wearing a red blazer with gold trim, holding a binder the size of a phone book. She took the floor uninvited and began reading what she called her definitive statement on federal harassment and neighborhood collapse. It was 37 pages long. She got through the first 6 before Dana interrupted gently and said, "Karen, we're not here to discuss your trial." Karen snapped back, "Oh, but you are. You just don't realize it yet. Every one of you is a witness." What followed was a stunning collapse of composure. Karen shouted that she had been betrayed by the very people she beautified the community for, accused Dana of laundering HOA funds through the bake sale, and claimed the Gnome Rebellion was part of an international plot. Someone recorded the whole thing. The video went viral on social media with the caption, "Hoy Karen loses it, blames lawn." Decorations for her arrest. Even national media outlets picked it up. Overnight, Karen became an unwilling internet sensation. Her trial wasn't just a local scandal anymore, it was national comedy, and yet she still didn't get it. The night before her court date, a moving truck arrived at her house. Nobody saw who ordered it, and the driver left before anyone could ask questions. But by morning, half of Karen's furniture was gone. The porch plants, the flags, the HOA president welcomes you sign all vanished. But she didn't move out. She stayed. Maybe out of defiance, maybe because she truly believed she was coming back from this. But the silence around her house was louder than any of her tantrums. It was the sound of a woman who had finally run out of people to yell at. As for me, I spent that evening tightening a few bolts on my next project, a new design, one that took into account every lesson I'd learned from the crash and the investigation. It wasn't about revenge or proving Karen wrong anymore. It was about building something better, safer, smarter, and knowing that the next time someone like her tried to tear it down, I'd already be flying too high for them to reach. But tomorrow would bring the trial. Tomorrow would bring the verdict. Karen had mocked. Federal investigators tampered with protected evidence, destroyed property, and lied to a whole community. And now she'd finally have to face the one thing she couldn't toe, intimidate, or ignore. Consequences. The courthouse was buzzing that morning, with a strange blend of tension and amusement. There was no shortage of spectators, journalists, neighbors, even a few curious pilots who had followed the case online. It wasn't every day a suburban HOA president stood trial for federal obstruction. And tampering with aviation evidence, I arrived early and took a seat quietly toward the back. Not looking for attention, but unwilling to miss the final chapter of the chaos Karen had ignited. She entered the courtroom, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they'd aged 10 years since accepting the case. Karen herself wore a business suit 2 sizes too bold, fire truck red with shoulder pads sharp enough to slice drywall. Her hair was twisted up into a defiant bun, and she walked like she was arriving to receive an award instead of possibly a sentence. The judge, a weathered man with no tolerance for theatrics, wasted no time. "Let's keep this brief and factual," he said. "We're here on serious charges, no grandstanding." That warning was clearly aimed at Karen, who had already opened her binder. Her attorney leaned over and whispered something, probably reminding her that no one in the courtroom had asked for a speech. The prosecution's case was simple, methodical, and devastating. They laid out the timeline, the illegal towing of federally tagged aircraft, the deliberate concealment in a relative storage unit, the social media footage showing Karen directing the tow and mocking the investigation, and her repeated public statements where she denied the plane was real, accused the federal government of lying, and claimed she was cleaning up junk. Every clip, every document, every bit of footage painted a picture of someone who didn't just break the law, but stomped all over it while live streaming. Then they introduced the recovered black box. A specialist from the NTSB took the stand and explained the significance of the data it held, the impact it had already made in prompting safety advisories nationwide, and how close they'd come to losing it permanently. The prosecutor asked, would this investigation have been compromised if the flight data hadn't been recovered? The specialist didn't hesitate. Absolutely, and lives might have been lost down the line as a result. That landed hard. There was a hush in the courtroom, the kind that stretches when everyone realizes they're watching the moment. Gravity finally hits the fool who's been floating on delusion. Karen's defense, if you could call it. That was a rambling disaster. Her attorneys tried to argue that she didn't understand the aircraft was part of an investigation, that she acted out of concern for neighborhood safety, and that no official paperwork had been handed directly to her. It was a weak argument, especially when the prosecution showed a frame-by-frame video of Karen ripping down the federal warning seal and laughing while doing it. But the moment that truly cemented her fate came when she insisted on testifying in her own defense against her lawyer's advice. She marched up to the stand and began her testimony by declaring, "This has been a war for our skies, our streets, and our suburban peace." It spiraled from there. She accused the NTSB of collaborating with aircraft manufacturers to create crashes in order to boost regulation budget. She claimed that the wrecked plane was planted by Ray, whom she now referred to only as the engineer. At one point, she said the black box was probably filled with fake data and that her HOA actions were actually a public service. The prosecutor didn't even need to cross-examine, the jury didn't need convincing, The judge had to interrupt her mid-rant to remind her that this was not a conspiracy podcast. When she finally stepped down, her attorneys just stared blankly ahead, like they'd mentally quit the case. Halfway through, deliberations were short. The jury returned the verdict in under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge didn't even schedule a later sentencing date. He announced it right there, in the room like a surgeon delivering news that couldn't wait. Karen was sentenced to 9 months, probation, 200 hours of community service, a federal fine of $50,000, and mandatory counseling. But more than that, she was banned from holding any leadership position in a registered neighborhood association for 5 years. She blinked, stunned, and then asked, "Does this mean I can't run for HOA president again?" The judge didn't respond. He just tapped the gavel once and adjourned. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the sidewalk. Karen tried to hold a press conference, but her lawyer physically blocked her from reaching the microphones. "I didn't stop to speak to anyone. I just walked down the steps and kept going. That part of my life, of my quiet road turning into a national joke, was finally over. But closure came in the most unexpected way. Later that week, I was in my garage tinkering with the new aircraft frame. When a knock came at the side door, I opened it to find Dana, the now official HOA president, standing there with a clipboard and a gift basket. "Don't worry," she said quickly. "This is a thank you, not a fine." We both laughed. She handed over the basket and said, "The board voted unanimously to issue a formal apology for everything, for doubting you, for not stepping in sooner. You saved more than just a plane. You saved this place from her." I thanked her, not just for the words, but for having the courage to take over the wreckage Karen had left behind. The neighborhood slowly transformed. Karen's house went up for sale a month later. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. One day, she was just gone, a moving truck, a locked door, and a lingering sense of relief. The community voted to remove all the strange policies she had pushed over the years. The wind chime bans, the birdhouse restrictions, the rule about American flags only being displayed at 45 degrees angles. People started painting their mailboxes fun colors. Someone put up a HOA free zone sign during Halloween with a skeleton dressed as Karen standing next to it. Even the kids who had once been afraid to skateboard past her lawn started doing tricks in front of her old driveway. As for me, the new aircraft took shape, slowly but confidently. Every weld, every bolt was informed by the lessons the crash and the chaos had taught me. It wasn't just about flying, it was about perseverance, about standing your ground when you're right, even if the entire block lines up against you, about knowing that sometimes the wreckage isn't what's broken. Sometimes it's the people too afraid to admit they are. When the plane was ready, I took it for its first test run at sunrise. A few neighbors gathered to watch, coffee cups in hand, some even clapping as the engine purred to life. As I ascended into the sky, the neighborhood grew smaller below me, but in a good way, not distant, but peaceful, restored. The last thing I saw before banking east was Karen's old house, now with a new coat of paint, a new welcome sign, and a new beginning. And in that moment above it all, I smiled, because the wreckage may have been hers, but the flight that was mine.